And welcome back to the Voices of Victory podcast show. This is literally part two of mastering difficult conversations. Okay, so it's literally part two. Difficult convos. There we go. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. The focus today will be on the critical steps to prepare for a difficult conversation. And that's the thing, you just really never know. And a lot of that preparedness is mental preparedness, being mentally prepared. Because what some people will do is mentally rehearse in their head how the conversation might go. And they play this mental chess game as to what will happen, what will they say, how will they say it, what if we fight, what if, and they play this what if game, which leads to lots of anxiousness and anxiety. And quite honestly, there's critical steps to prepare for the difficult conversation. I want to bring to you a simple format that's going to help you. The very first thing that you want to be aware of literally is the purpose. Okay? With the purpose, why do we need a purpose? Because, well, you have to define the intention. Right? And the intention literally is going to support you with the outcome. Intent is everything. It is absolutely everything. It's very important that you approach the conversation with the right intention. And that is going toward the desired outcome that you actually want. The next one, which is really crucial, is respect. Respect is going to be important, especially when we're talking about leadership here. We are dealing with difficult conversations as it relates to leadership. And when it comes to respect, we have to have genuine respect for the other person. Very crucial. It seems so easy and so fundamental, but it's very important. Now, when you have the purpose, the intent is very important. When you have a conversation with somebody, what's the intent behind it? Is your intent to argue? Is your intent to be right and feed the ego? What's your intent? Is your intent to solve a problem? Is your intent to get through a conflict? Because when it comes to conflict, two people can actually come to an understanding. And that's where the rubber will meet the road, is right there. Now, the next part that we want to move towards is to inquire. When we inquire, we're going to prepare our thoughtful questions, because what you want to do is understand their perspective. So this is all about the inquirer. Inquiring minds want to know, right? And the whole point of inquiring is to understand. It's to understand, and of course we have perspective. Okay? So when you are you're preparing yourself, and that's what this whole part two is about. This is about your mindset and the mental preparation. That you understand the purpose of what this conversation is going to be about. You understand the intent, and you understand the outcomes that you want. You are going to have the mindset of being respectful and professional. You're going to inquire. That's part of the conversation, is to inquire from them to understand their perspective, to understand their side. Very important. And that brings us over to the next one, which is literally to manage. Okay? To manage. With managing, it sounds simple, but it's really not. It's actually controlling emotions. Controlling your emotions. Okay? Very important. This is because this part here is all about reactions. There's reactions and then there's responding. When you react, you fall into that traditional, quick, fast, knee-jerk reaction that you feel like you don't have a choice, but in actuality, you do. And it's just you feel like you don't have a choice because you've been conditioned to fall to those reactions for so many years. So how do we override those reactions? Well, first off, it's good to actually slow down. Slowing down your speech is going to be very important. Slowing down your own speech when you're talking to somebody else. Now, when it comes down to them, the other person might speed up. They might actually move a lot quicker. They might talk a lot quicker. Avoid matching their speed. Avoid matching their pace. If they speak fast, you can start to speak a little slower. And you can even put some pauses in your speech. And the whole point of that is it gives the time for your body, your nervous system to settle and allow you to move through it. The last one is literally the environment. When it comes down to the environment, this is really the time, the place, it's all part of it, and of course, the actual setting. The actual setting. We need that. You want to have the right environment. Some people who say, oh, I don't care where we are, they just throw themselves to their reaction. When they say something like that, I don't really care where we are, I'm just going to say it, being blunt, a lot of people will say, well, I'm blunt and that's the way I talk. We don't want to let our patterns, our old patterns of bluntness be the marker for good communication. I think a lot of people say, well, I'm blunt, that's the way I talk. And I hear that a lot. But what they tend to forget is that when you are speaking to people, you can have some grace. In other words, being blunt isn't an excuse. It's not an excuse to say, well, that's the way I talk. That's just the way I'm wired. No, that doesn't get a vote from me. And the reason why it doesn't get a vote for me is because this is about improving, all of this is about improving your communication. So if you've been running those old patterns, it's time to become a better communicator and train yourself to override those old patterns. And it takes time and it takes practice. It's not going to happen overnight. But when people say, oh, well, that's just the way I talk, I'm blunt, and that's just the way it is, you're basically arguing for the limit of your communication. You're basically saying, that's the way I talk and that's all I can do because that's my pattern. And that's the way I'm wired. And they use terminologies like that. And what that does is it really locks them into a place of staying in their old ways. Growth will be really hard and stubbornness has a cost. And when you are learning to communicate, you have to be flexible. And that's what this is all about. So you can see how all of these come into play here. So let's go over it again for part 2. This is wonderful. Part 2 is purpose, which is all about the intent and the outcome. Respect is genuine respect coming from a respectful place. Inquire, to understand their perspective. Manage is all about controlling your emotions. We talked about the speed of your speech will impact the controlling of your emotions. And of course, environment, the time, the place, and the actual setting is so important to understand how crucial this is. Now what I'm going to do, now we're going to move on to the next phase. I'm going to erase all this really quick, and we will be right back. And here we are, really quick. Again, let's go over the next section. We've talked about the mental preparation aspect. Let's talk about emotional intelligence in leadership conversations. The first thing you want to consider is self-awareness. When it comes to self-awareness, this is about recognizing two things. It's recognizing your triggers and your biases. So there are many ways to become self-aware. Meditation is one way, mindfulness is another, breath work is another. All of those are great methods to become more self-aware. But the number one tool that anyone can do is literally journaling. Because if you journal about your triggers, you journal about your biases, you'll start to see them for what they are and be able to work with them. That's the greatest way. This is the one-way ticket to becoming self-aware. This is the easiest, no frills, everyone method. It applies to every human being who can write. All right, and if you can't, then using a keyboard would obviously be yet another tool. I am a believer in pen and paper still, believe it or not. Even though technology is there, and even though I've been using technology since 1970, I can still say that I will choose to write with a pen and paper over technology. And it's definitely the way I do things. Now, outside of self-awareness, we also have self-regulation, which is awesome. And with self-regulation, it's techniques to really stay calm. Okay? To regulate yourself. And you could say that self-awareness helps that. That's what's beautiful about that. Now, when it comes down to it, empathy is the next tool. It's one of the tools. One of the things you have to learn is empathy is literally, the best way I can put it is consider the conversation from their viewpoint. Okay? Consider the conversation from their viewpoint. Ask yourself, is there another side to this? Now, before you have this meeting with this person, you can talk to a few friends or a few coworkers and say, hey, what are some other sides to this that we're not seeing? Ask the question, because it'll allow you to become objective and see all sides. That objectivity would allow you to see a great deal. And outside of the empathy is literally social skills, which is why you're here. Okay? Social skills. And the social skills, part of that is to create psychological safety. It's to create psychological safety. Psychological safety it's not a mental trick you're trying to play on another person. That's not it. Think of it as like setting the tone for the conversation that, hey, listen, no matter how this is going to go down, this is going to be a safe environment where we can actually talk about it. We're going to take a time together to work together and make sure that both of us can express everything that's going on safely. And that's a very important part of the whole aspect. So you can see with the emotional intelligence, this is literally in leadership conversations. And with leadership conversations, these are going to be crucial. You need the self-awareness to become aware of your triggers and your biases. Journaling will help you with that. That once you're aware of those things, you could ask yourselves some counter questions. Like, okay, you have a belief. What's the counter belief to that? Okay, very important. Very important. You may believe X. What's the counter belief to X? And what is the opposite of that? Self-regulation is staying calm, and that's really controlling your parasympathetic nervous system. The empathy is understanding that there's more viewpoints. You know, some people have a tendency to rush to their own viewpoint without considering objectively all sides. Very important. And the social skills of it, your social skills can help you create the psychological safety for that conversation to actually take place. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly take a few seconds. I'm going to erase this, and we're going to go on to the next lesson here. All right, now we're going to move on to the next lesson aspect of this. The next one we want to worry about assumptions, right? Assumptions. We're going to do what we call the assumption audit. Okay. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to list all assumptions. Got it? You're going to list all the assumptions that you have about the situation. That's the first thing. Then, now that you list them, just form a list, just dump them out of your head onto paper. From there, you have to be able to look at what is the facts and what are interpretations. Okay? So when you do an assumption audit, you list all the assumptions, and then we have to look at what are the facts of the situation and what is the interpretations. Okay? Perception is not reality. Okay? Interpretations of our perceptions is reality. It's reality to them and it's reality to you. But below those interpretations, below that is the facts. That's where we have to become objective. Very important to have that in mind when you're doing it. So we have to be objective because, quite honestly, you have to see which assumptions are fake in terms of perceptions. You know, they're not exactly real, right? And then you have to have the facts, the actual information, the real insights that are there. Then what you want to do is prepare questions. And you prepare the questions that challenge. They challenge what? They challenge good old assumptions. Okay? That's what it's all about. You have to form some questions that challenge those actual assumptions so when you're speaking to them, it comes out the way it should. And the whole point of doing that is really to test the assumptions. That's what it's all about. You're trying to test those assumptions. That is crucial because what you're trying to do is really separate, you're trying to separate two things. You're trying to separate the intent, the intentions, from the fact. Got it? That's the whole point. That's the whole point. When you are doing your best, you really want to practice separating those two. Okay? You want to separate the intentions from the facts. Very, very important. So you can see how this is the assumption audit section, and it's really crucial. What we're going to do next is go over the last two parts, and then we're going to wrap it up. So we're going to go over the next section, which is strategic conversation planning. I'm going to go ahead and erase all this. And from here, all right, let's move on to the next section, which is the strategic conversation. So, okay, the strategic conversation that we're going to have, this is what it's all about. The first step is literally the opening. How are you going to open? Okay, and never rush the opening. Some people will rush. Some people want to have the first word, not always the last, but some people want to rush to open with the first word without actually trying to listen. Never rush, because you have to be able to listen. Okay. The reason why you have to listen is there might be some data, some info that's going to help you. So it's very crucial that you do not rush your opening. Then from here is literally, what's your core message? What's your core message going to be? What's the essential point that you're trying to communicate? Okay. And what are the obstacles in the conversation? What are the obstacles in that conversation? What resistance, what emotional resistance might rise? Okay, what emotions they might actually come up? That happens. And what is, last but not least, what's your outcome? Are you firing somebody? Like, are you trying to explain that someone's feelings were hurt? Like, what is what you're trying to accomplish? Very important. So just to reiterate, for a strategic conversation, have an opening. What do you want to open with? How would you like to open that conversation? Never rush it, okay? Because you want to listen. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. It means you want to listen 2 times more than you speak. And you want to listen and look for data. Information acts like clues. And the clues are trying to clue you in and help you understand what's really going on. And then the core message. What's your core message that you want to deliver? Okay, what's the important thing that really needs to land? Did they break a rule? Were they late? Like, what's the core message? Is it something good, or you're trying to give them positive feedback? What's the core message? And what obstacles could be in the way? Emotions, timing, schedule. Sometimes it can be schedule, like, oh, you're not working the same day they are, so on, right? And what's the outcome? How do you want to see that situation come out? How do you want to see that situation finish? What does success look like for both parties? Not just one, but both. Both parties. What does success look like for 2 people? That's what that's all about. So now, that being said, I want to move over to some practical tools that you can use outside of this, and that will conclude part 2 for today. So that's going to be the fun part. Let me go ahead and clean this up. All right. And when it comes down to, let's talk about some tools. So tools that are really good, you could just create a checklist of everything we discussed. You can make a quick checklist of what you're going to do, what you're going to talk about, the whole 9. Think of this as a pre-convo checklist. Okay, it's pre-conversation. That's the whole thing that's going on there. Now, another thing too is emotional regulation. Emotional regulation. So that would be breathing techniques, breathing techniques, mindfulness techniques, anything that's going to help regulate. Slowing down, speaking slowly can actually help you. Can actually help you with that. Also, different perspectives. Write down the perspectives. The possible perspectives. Okay, the ones that are possible. What you think is possible. And from here, another one that's really good is rehearse out loud. Rehearse. And another thing you could do is write it down. Write down what you're going to say. Write down. Okay. Got a little low on ink there, but I got it. There we go. Write down. What you would do is write down what you want to say and then rehearse it. Okay. You could also write down what you're going to say and record it. Record it in audio. Unless you're really checking for body language, then it's video. Okay? Either one will work. So this summarizes like all of our tools right here. Create a pre-conversation checklist, all the things that we discussed. Emotionally regulate yourself. How are you going to do that? You're going to be breathing deep. So a very easy technique for emotional regulation. Full lung capacity, inhale. Hold it for 4 count. And then release it slowly. Allow it to come out slowly. Very simple. It's not box breathing, but it's very simple. Box breathing is another one that Navy SEALs actually use. Then look at the different perspectives. Try to be objective. Look at the perspective. Rehearse it. You know, once you figure out what you want to say, rehearse it. You can do that by writing it down. Kind of write down what you want to say. Rehearse it out loud. Record it on audio and video. What this will do is give you mental preparedness. It'll allow you to practice with your speech and your body language. That's what it's going to be all about.